Hey, welcome to the Bigger Boat Podcast, a podcast where we talk about big things with even bigger emotions. I'm your co-host, Josh,
I'm Ashley.
and welcome to our inaugural episode.
Yay.
Should we get the elephant out of the room? Okay. So, those of you guys that don't know, you guys might know us by other names. I am one of the co-hosts of Abyss Gazing here at Victims and Villains, and I will love to give the microphone over to this beautiful lady right next to me to talk about where you may know her from.
So, if you're from the cosplay community, you're going to recognize me a little bit. Maybe the voice, not so much the face. I've been told I'm a shapeshifter. Um, but I'm a cosplayer. I go by Smash B in all my cosplay performances and everything like that. I have also shown up on several of the Abyss Gazing podcasts as a cosplayer. But today you're getting me as just me, as Ashley, and Josh, as just Josh.
So we'll talk about why we picked this movie first off, but I feel like this is probably kind of like the appropriate space to do it. So Ashley is a face you will be seeing a lot more of in Victims and Villains content moving forward. Um, Ashley is also my lovely partner, and just announcing it out there for the world. So originally back in January, I posted this video.
So this is a video I never under any circumstances nor wanted to make, nor did I think I'd make this soon in my life. Last Thursday, one of my biggest fears was realized, and my wife is currently in critical care right now. And so with that said, any events in February and possibly into March and maybe even into April are being paused and or rescheduled, and the same will go to any content that we normally create, ranging from the podcast on our podcast network, as well as just general movie reviews, editorials, etc. This is basically to allow me to take a step back, focus on my mental health, my family. This is not just my decision. This is a entire decision of Victims and Villains as a whole nonprofit. At this time, if you guys are the praying type, I would covet your prayers. And if you guys just want to send good vibes, please be good vibes. With that said, over the next couple of weeks, you guys will start to see a couple of podcasts that we have just kind of held on to for rainy days that we recorded in the last year, which will include our panel from last year's Atomicon, an interview with Confessions of a Traitor, as well as a brand new episode of That's High Praise. Now, this will be the last of several things that we will be doing. We will now be promoting a lot on social media. We'll be going dark on social media. Any posts that you've seen from us in the last week have been already pre-scheduled earlier this month. My hope is to be back in a couple of weeks, but again, Victims and Villains is honestly the last thing on my mind, unfortunately, at this moment. That this will be our last post for the next several weeks.
And if you guys have ever met me at a show, you guys can recognize that this is probably someone new in my life. The relationship that I have had between my former partner and we are now separated and are in the process of a divorce for just a number of reasons. For the sake of our own mental health, we just kind of thought that it was better to part ways. And Ashley and we met doing the con circuits, and part of the reason that we are doing this today, Jaws, is not just their 50th year anniversary, but it's also something that kind of has a significance for us as friends, turned partners, and I will let her share that. But we met probably 4 years ago doing cons at Virginia Comic Con, and she was part of our 24-hour live stream that you can catch her segment right now.
Hey guys, Smash from Smash B Cosplay here. Thank you so much for letting me be a part of this Victims and Villains live streaming event showcasing cosplay and mental health. So I'm gonna give you guys a little bit of background information about how I got started into cosplay, and then I'll talk a little bit about mental health and how it's impacted my mental health specifically. But thank you guys for letting me be a part of this, and let me go ahead and tell you my story. So I started cosplaying, I want to say seriously, like competing in things, a little over a year ago. It was July 2022. We had always dressed up, done really big things for Halloween, got really excited about certain like movies coming out, and we dress up for movies, but we never really considered it as something we would be doing every weekend. So we started for my daughter. At the time, she was about to be 3. We had taken her to a Busch Gardens show, and of course the cast was dressed up as certain things for Halloween, and she decided that she wanted to be part of the show. So before we even started competing, she was getting into the like play acting. So our first cosplay that we did was Billie Eilish, specifically Bad Guy Billie Eilish. And thinking back on it, you know, I have 3 kids. I'm a mom to 3 toddlers, 2 girls and a boy. The girls were little tiny Billie Eilishes running around, and it was the cutest thing ever. But we really started to invest in it because we saw that it made our oldest daughter happy. Right before then, I had my son, and he was actually a NICU baby. So he required a lot of extra help, and it really took its toll on us as a family. At that point, I had 3 under 3, and if you are not familiar with that term, it's basically 3 kids under the age of 3 years old. So I was living with 3 toddlers. I was a primary caretaker. My husband works the 9-to-5 job so that I can stay and raise our kids. And we found that because he needed so much additional attention, it was pulling away attention from my oldest, who was really feeling left out. You know, my middle daughter, she was younger, so she wasn't quite always aware of it, but by the time my oldest turned 3, she was very aware of it. So we entered her in a local cosplay competition. Had no idea what we were doing, expected nothing out of it. Nothing came out of it, but pure joy and happiness. And we met photographers through the convention that we still work with today, who honestly are some of the best photographers to photograph kids, in my opinion. But we changed our whole family dynamic from cosplay. So at first it was just me and the 4-year-old cosplaying. And then slowly it became every weekend, every other weekend, we were going to different conventions around Virginia as a family, and we were competing as a family. And at first it was just like something that brought us all joy, brought us close together, helped us all reconnect. And then I started to realize, like, wow, it's a lot of work. And being a mom to 3 is already a ton of work. And then when you put in the aspect of competing on top of that, and going and showcasing your cosplays, it gets very, very, very overwhelming very quickly. I didn't really know how to handle being a mom to 3 tiny kids. And while it was my choice to be a mom to 3 tiny kids at once, you're not really given the tools for that. So my mental health took a hit. It took a hard hit, to the point where, like, there were days where I didn't want to be a mom. I didn't want to get out of bed. And it's not something that's, like, regularly talked about, I don't think. And this is just my mental health as, like, a mom, and how, like, cosplay opened those doors to finding this whole other level of happiness. But for me, like, I didn't want to spend time with my family. I didn't want to do anything. So when we started competing, if you want to place, it has to be homemade. You can have some stuff. It just kind of, and it doesn't really matter what type of a cosplayer you are. I just had a very, very, very pushy 4-year-old who likes to win. She very much likes to win. She definitely pushes all of us to be our best selves. So I started to realize that, okay, I'm gonna have to start making all these cosplays. How am I gonna do that? And I realized it gave me a deadline. It stopped me from procrastinating, and it gave a reason for me to feel like a good mom again, honestly. So crafting of cosplays, that became kind of my serotonin. And then when we would go out and people would ask to take pictures with us, or ask me how I created certain things that the toddlers were wearing, I felt so much joy and accomplishment. But even more than that, the kids were enjoying every aspect of it. So I felt like, wow, okay, maybe I'm not such a bad mom after all. And then the more that we started competing, the more we started getting recognized by bigger cosplayers and guests. And we've been so fortunate enough to get into, now finally, I know it's only been a year, but we now have really good cosplay community friends that we can rely on, that we can always go to for advice cosplay wise, and also other cosplayers that are watching our kids grow up and watching them enjoy cosplay. So it's a really, really unique experience to kind of come into cosplay from a different angle. You know, I have no prior modeling. I have like 0 photography abilities. I'm only now just starting to get comfortable like in front of a camera. But it's just like a whole nother level and a whole nother world out there. And I feel so fortunate to even get to talk to you all today about just how positive cosplay has been for us and for my mental health, and the fact that the community that is around cosplay, even though a lot of times it's not painted in the best light, for some of us, it is a mental health safe place. I know for me, I don't really know what our life would look like without cosplay at this point. It's definitely different, but it changes for the better. And that's why I think groups like Victims and Villains that come out and showcase the positivity of cosplay and the community, and to show that there are people in the community that care about your mental health and care about how you're doing. I think, you know, as cosplayers in this community, we all need to be there for each other, because you never know what anyone's going through. And I know that's said a lot, but being someone who's just a mom with what feels like absolutely no talent to be recognized by so many other people, and to see my children have joy just from other cosplayers in the community wanting to work with them and be around them and have them at their photo shoots and watch them grow up and compliment their cosplays. It is such a positive feeling. And what's most important to me is they're young. I have, like I said, I have 3 of them. They're 4, 3, and 2 at this stage in life. And being that young, the things we say can really impact their lives. So for them to have this community and for me to have the same level of community with them, it is truly a wonderful experience. But that's my story, and thank you guys so much for having me and letting me tell my story. Bye.
And we just kind of stayed in touch. We kind of grew a friendship. We saw each other a lot at cons, and I don't know what was our friendship like for you in the beginning.
Well, we were both working cons. That was kind of the thing, right? Like, I was running around doing things. You were working the victims table. And we met at Virginia Comic Con. I think I was dressed as, like,
Loki.
not Loki. I was Croc Sylvie. I love smash ups, as we call them, but mashing up different characters. Um, but it was just this like really surreal friendship. It was the first time I felt comfortable enough to kind of openly talk about my mental health. And when Victims and Villains had me on their live stream, I I opened up about some really really dark stuff that you don't necessarily talk about or you hear it all the time, but I had talked a lot about postpartum depression. Um, for those of you who don't know, I have 3 beautiful children. None of them are Josh's. He is the stepped-in dad. Their dad is still in their life. We co-parent very respectfully. And this is just kind of the dynamic that worked for us. I don't want to talk too much on their dad and his journey just because that's his journey, that's his privacy. Um, and occasionally, maybe further on down the line, you'll get to meet some of the littles if they choose to want to be on the show. But for me, our friendship was just, it came very easily, very natural. But we both kind of moved in our own directions, I would say. You were very heavily focused on mental health outreach. I was very heavily focused on balancing a life as a cosplayer while also being a mom to 3 kids while navigating school and all kinds of new things, a new family dynamic, and some pretty big mental health challenges with myself and some of my children struggling as well. So Josh really came in and kind of helped, even if he didn't know it at first. We we kept in touch via Instagram DM, good old DMs, and believe it or not, we only really communicated in form of Jaws memes.
Oh, there was something before that too. Like you also got to keep in mind that I think I talked about this on the abyss gazing episode we did, where Jaws for me was something I saw as a kid, and I was like, this is supposed to be like one of the greatest movies of all time. What a crock of shit. and I really like. You were like, nah, you got to give it another chance. You got to give it another chance. And that was like the first like couple of years of our relationship where we would like talk about cons and we would talk about like what cosplays you were doing and what Victims and Villains was doing. And we would every couple of yeah, Jaws memes, and then like every couple of like every probably like 4 or 5 months, you would say be like, "Have you watched Jaws? Have you given it another chance? What do you think about it? Has he watched it? Yeah, have you watched the sequels?" And eventually, it kind of got to this point where I did give it another chance, and I was like, "All right, I see why everyone really loves this." I watch it probably about once a year now. Um, you watch it religiously. I still watch it probably once a year. It's mostly something I watch like right as like the summer season is like getting ready to start because I'm like it's the perfect summer movie.
You're supposed to watch it on July 4th. True Jaws fans watch it every July 4th. You don't celebrate America, you celebrate Jaws. You celebrate Peter Benchley and this amazing creation and Spielberg bringing that novel to life. I mean, every 4th of July I watch it. Whether I'm at home, at the beach. It's really fun to watch at the beach actually. um not all of us like the ocean. Like the unknown of the ocean.
I'm not terrible about the ocean and stuff like that, but um I also like I feel like I want to emphasize that like for us like friendships was like strictly platonic. Like I feel like a lot of people like hear our story and they're like, was there like an emotional investment on either part? Um, because things moved kind of rather fast in the beginning, which is fine. Um, but no, it was she would try to flirt and I was like completely oblivious to it. I would be like stonewalled. I'd be like, let's talk about like serious things like mental health and how do you make this cosplay? Or hey, I've got a cosplay question. I've got this idea. How would you do this? It's funny because like when we started dating, we like went back and like actually reread some of those messages, and she was like, "I was flirting here," and they were like Jaws memes, and I was like, "How was I supposed to get that from this?" And it would be something about like Quint or like the mayor, something just be like, I need to see the world through your eyes.
I mean, that wasn't even like it was a good way to keep in touch, because every so often we would go and we would not talk to each other for a while. And it was kind of like my way of like knock knock knock, Sharky's at the door. And um it was also like, I don't know, Jaws is just a fun icebreaker. And for those of you who have met me, I bleed Jaws. I love Jaws. I love it so much. But like I don't actually think I was actively trying to like flirt until as the young kids say, I was sliding into your DMs. It wasn't necessarily flirtation yet. I wouldn't say flirtation really even happened until Frighteners podcast. And I worked my butt off to impress you for that. Like hardcore. Worked your butt off.
So the Frighteners podcast happened by like almost total accident. All right. Well, we've had a lot of like people from film and music. I want something that would be like really, really different. And I had never seen the movie before, so I didn't know anything about it. And I remember like scrolling on my Instagram, trying to find a guest that would be different enough. And I came across a post that you had made, and it was like one of, I think it was something from like Virginia, one of the cons here in Virginia, and I was like, oh, Smash would be like a perfect guest for this. And I was like, hey, you should come do this podcast. And it was like 48-hour notice. Like there was like not a lot of time like to like watch this movie, and like came on, and I was like, here's the deal. I think it was like a Saturday, and I was like, here's the deal. We're recording this on Monday. Can you do it? And you were like, yes. And that was kind of the first one thing. And then like I remember I was like, oh, I gave you this platform. I don't know if you remember this, but like you'd give me this platform, and I had sent you the link once the episode was done, and you were like, when are we doing this Jaws episode? Like I was like one of your like very like first questions, and because it was last year I think, and you were yeah, and you were like, we need to do Jaws next year. It's gonna be 50. It's my favorite movie of all time, and I was like, I don't know. And then like it just so happened it we had a huge gap in our schedule, and we ended up. Well, I was like, it's time. Like it kind of almost felt like it was like that moment from like Lion King where like Simba finally takes the takes Pride Rock. That's like the way that I like envisioned it. I like slid into your DMs, and I was like, I think I just said it's time. And your first initial reaction was, oh, we're doing this Jaws episode.
Mm-hmm. I love Jaws, man. That was a fun episode too. You didn't know it at the time, but and that was kind of what it became after Frighteners, was sliding into the DMs with Jaws memes. You didn't know this at the time, but it was, I don't know. I always sent those when I didn't know how to talk to people, and really, really hard stuff was going on at home. And I would send a Jaws meme, and you'd either say something really stupid and witty back, or you'd send a little heart if you were busy. And I'm trying to think. Jaws we did this year.
Yeah, we did it in
But
May.
I remember it's still after Frighteners, it became, because Frighteners wasn't this year, Frighteners was last year. I remember when your ex got really sick and was in the hospital, and I didn't know. No one had told me. I just sent a Jaws meme, checked in. You had posted something, I think, after I sent that, and I checked in to be like, hey, are you okay? And I think somehow secretly those Jaws memes kind of became a little bit of a, I honestly want to say like a reprieve for the both of us in a way. I would always send them when I was feeling my lowest, and of course he had no idea any of this was going on, none whatsoever. And I'm glad we're getting to talk about Jaws again, because that podcast, it did not go the way I wanted it to. And it wasn't it just you, me, and Billy for Jaws? Yeah. I still don't think Mark exists, but hey, buddy, I know you exist now. I believe you. Um, but and like I said, you didn't know it, but I find it really hard to watch that podcast back and to listen to it, because I love this movie and my heart was not in it. Um, I had frantically um act makeup on to hide my tears, and I had a really, really, really hard stuff happening at home right before the podcast, and it was my favorite movie. And I was fighting tears before we turned the cameras on. Yeah. and I was dressed up like Quint, and it was pretty good. It was pretty good for a closet cosplay. And I just looked so sad. And I hated that because it's my favorite movie, and your favorite movies are supposed to bring you joy, not sadness, not stress. And I was so underprepared. I was so mentally not there. And so it became like this. Jaws became, I guess, a symbol for us both in a way. It was kind of like this hope that tethered us together, even if we didn't realize we both really like needed each other. I don't know if you want to talk about that at all, because you definitely had it from a different perspective. You were going through your own stuff.
Yeah, I've talked about it a lot this year. So Victims and Villains put essentially a pause on all content, all things, which was like really hard because we had 2 film festivals, a tour with So Much Hope Buried, and like two promotional events, as well as Horrific Hope, and even we had uh, done a couple of like local music things here. We were plan in 2025 was to hit the ground running. I look back at some of the January podcasts that we did with Abyss Gazing, and I was like, I'm so proud of those episodes. Those episodes were like my safe haven. And I remember we did the Martyrs episode, and Martyrs in and of itself was already a hard film to talk about, and it was a hard podcast to do because at that time Mark had been, I want to say, about a month from like losing his uncle. And so he had a lot of things, and our guest Chino had also gone through a lot of things, and my ex at the time had been getting really sick, and both of us at the time just had thought that it was kidney stones, and we ultimately found out that it was a whole lot worse. Um, and that was kind of the first time that I remember kind of just this year was really shitty from like an emotional perspective. Not necessarily from the fact that like we had to cancel a bunch of things or reschedule stuff. Like it was just this year has been, and I've talked about it in later, more recent events that we've done, whether you're talking about Autumn Horrorland or um, the tours with arteries like estuaries or any of those stuff. That this year has been has been the worst year of my life, and it was the emotional turmoil that happened not just from the ex situation, but also the now divorced, also the uh, other things that happened that I will remain anonymous about, just out of respect. And just a few other things. Like, I mean, this year was like literally one of the shittiest years of my life, and I've talked about it. And it was like it was weird because like when you have like relationships with like friends that are like that you've known for a while. Like I look at the guys at Abyss Gazing, and I'm like very grateful for those guys. I'm very, very grateful for the dudes in arteries like estuaries. A lot of those friendships this year have got me through this year. But there was always kind of this like those like Jaws memes where like they sound like it sounds like so ridiculous to like talk about because it's like it's not just memes. It's a specific, very niche type of meme. And part of it was literally having the ability to be reminded that someone like cared enough to like make me laugh. Like yes, like I talked about this on a most recent episode of Abyss Gazing, but one of my favorite moments of this year We talked about this in Night Freddy's Dead episode. Was Mark had called me specifically when everything had, like, literally just happened, and asked me the same basic questions that everyone else asked me. And have you eaten today? Are you getting sleep? Are you doing enough to take care of your own mental health? And he just looked at me and goes, have you washed your ass today? And it caught me so off guard, but it's like one of those moments that like made me laugh. But those Jaws memes were like something that I didn't know at the time, but were something that was like special. That it was like someone is not asking me these same exact questions that I'm hearing day in and day out. And I'm very grateful for that. That someone's like, I want to make you laugh. It's gonna be cheesy and it's gonna be dumb, but it's gonna be cheesy. It's gonna make you laugh. And so many of those things did make me laugh. And I think that was kind of not necessarily the dynamic of our friendship like changed, but there was like a very, very long string where like our communication was like exclusively memes. And it was great. It was so great.
It was. No, it was great, but it also helped us to, you know, make this podcast and Bigger Boat podcast and talking about big feelings and big emotions, big life changes, bigger stories to tell, just all around bigger. And one of the lines in Jaws is, "You're going to need a bigger boat." And when you think about that in terms of like, I like the analogy that a lot of people will use for moms as like spoons. Like, how many spoons do you have left? But if you're me, you think about it in terms of Jaws. And how big of a boat do you need? How big of a boat do you need to unpack what you need to unpack so that you can be healthier and in a better, stable mind state? And I know you can apply it to like anything and make it any way, shape, or form to fit what you're going through and what you're struggling with. But the idea of like having these big emotions and needing a bigger boat, needing a bigger vessel to help you through it and to help you carry it, I'm very grateful that I sent Jaws memes for the equivalent of what, like 4 years, 4 years of Jaws memes. Um, and I was very unapologetically okay with Jaws memes. Like, I was like, this is me, this is who I am. I don't care if you don't like the movie, but I love it. Now someone sends me Whale Shark Wednesdays. And then I send them to my friends who love sharks and whales, especially whale sharks. Um, but it became, I mean, and of course we're gonna talk about the movie, but it became so much more. And a lot of what I hear from people sometimes when I'm explaining us in this situation, it is always, was there something there before? And I mean, if you like really get down to it, it was the first time in a very long time that I didn't have to do anything and I was unconditionally supported just for being myself. No romance, no flirtation, no nothing. Just like, I think back on that 24-hour stream in my one segment, and I was opening about postpartum depression for the first time ever live. Um, Something that I hadn't even like unpacked in therapy or anything yet. And coming out and saying and recognizing it and saying like, hey, this is why I got into cosplay in the first place. From that moment, I knew no matter what, at least with you and victims, and I'm sure any of the other guys would have stepped up as well, but with you especially, I knew I didn't have to bring all this chaotic energy that's required when you're doing cosplay or panels or speaking at cons. You want to be high energy, you want to like fit the vibe, and this was the one time where like I got my raw real self. May have re-recorded several times to cut it down into like a 10-minute window. I think you gave me. Probably should have given me more time now that you think about it.
You have a whole podcast now.
I do. He liked me so much and liked my vulnerability so much. I get a whole podcast with you now. But I wouldn't change it. And still to this day, even God forbid anything happened between us, I know at the end of the day, no matter what, in your heart, that you would still support me and be happy and want to see me not suffering, which a lot of that time um, we both were. And we both didn't necessarily want to admit that we were. And so those little silly Jaws memes that were in the DM were like somehow more powerful than just being like, "Hey, what's up, dude? How's your life been?" It's like it's like, who's the villain in the story, the shark or the mayor?
It's the mayor. It's the mayor. But I think like also too like uh you were always just like, and I've talked about this. I think when we did Frighteners, like you were just before we started recording Frighteners, I was because I think you were like the last person to join the call before we started, if I remember correctly. Either that or like I was like telling Mark and Billy at the time that I was like, yeah, this chick is just cool, like super cool. And it was like, you meet people at cons and it's like cons are a lot like podcasts where like I've had a lot of guests over the years. I've been podcasting now for almost 10 years, and in that 10 years I have had some people that I have done stuff with many, many times. I think about people like Andy from Love What I Love, Mark, obviously, Zambies, Billy, Brandon, and I. We did a 90s podcast back in the day. We had a Spy Kids podcast, Land Before Time podcast that was very short lived. Um, and then like I think about like people like Justin that I've met, and then at cons, like there are people or guests that you meet like one time and it's like, these people will probably never come back to do the podcast again, or it was really cool to have them like, and like, then you meet like people like you, and it was kind of like, no, like I want this chick is just like awesome. And we would like see each other at cons and like we were always like intentional that like every conversation we had, even if it was in passing, it was like a 30-minute conversation. It was like, how did this con go for you? Like, how's life? Like, tell me about the process that this cosplay was. And then you'd be like, well, tell me how the con was for you. And, how much like mental health conversations and resources were you guys able to get out? Did you guys raise any money? Um, and that was always like really intent to like, I was always really glad to like see you at cons.
Well, I have a con story.
Oh God, hold on. Let me finish this, and then you can tell the con story. But like, I think we were talking about this actually before we started recording today. It was like, going back and like looking back at like our friendship turned relationship. I always did want the best for you, first and foremost. I still want the best for you, and I always encourage. And I think that's like kind of like one of the central like core values in our relationship. For one, for two, I had a crush on you so long, so long. But like also like I'm at the time was like very married, but like you brought up we didn't realize like how
bad in life we were at the time. At the time, we became friends. I was not in therapy. I was not dealing with the aftermath of being a suicide loss survivor. I had really busied myself. There were a few other things that like I hadn't ever been like, I'm going to work on this and like be better about this. And even in my last relationship, it was you stay together because that's the way that I was doing. Like divorce was like never supposed to be an option from like, how I was raised and like how I was taught. And, kind of just went through the motions. And, I've had to really come to terms with that of being a shitty partner back then and like really being intentional about working on myself as an individual and then also subsequently being a better partner for you, and a better example for the kids as well. Um, and that's kind of what she refers to when she talks about like just kind of being like well off, at least on my end, like where it's like I didn't couldn't have a name for it back then, but now it's in retrospect, it's like, yeah, this was like actually the norm. Like this was the things that I was feeling and didn't really do it. And, we talk about like busying ourselves. I think in 2023, like victims and villains we had done maybe 30 events. Like it's still a lot of events, but like we stepped it up. And I think by the time we ended last year in 2024, we had done 42 events, which is like almost one event a weekend. Um, we produced over 100 podcasts and had covered multiple film festivals and done cons and had done, a few. I'd only done, we did three tours with Saint of Pine Hills and Wine and War Paint. But like, again, it was this like, I'm going to busy myself so like I don't have to really deconstruct and kind of be in my knowledge, which is like in hindsight terrible for your mental health and really only implodes those and hurts those around you. And I've had to make a lot of amends this year with like people that like I hold near and dear. And yeah, learning from mistakes. That's been like the big learning curve of like the second half of this year. What's your con story though?
Well, only because you brought it up. You mentioned how I was always like eager to help the nonprofit out. Do you remember
Probably.
the Haunted Screams Expo in Hampton? I was dressed as Darth Maul, but I came over to the table and was like, I signed all these prints for you guys. You can charge people for my print. You can do whatever with them. Would give it to them when they buy it because I thought I was hot shit. Maybe now, but back then I was just this like little cosplayer with like 250 followers, and I was like, oh my god, I'm so cool. I'm so good at this. At the time, I was winning a lot of competitions with the kids. I was doing a lot of group competitions, and I think it was like Spider Gwenum, and I had like dropped off like 30 of them. I have no idea what happened to them. There was another person working the table with them, and they just looked me up and down like I was this big weirdo coming over, and you got out from behind the table. You're like, oh, thank you so much. And I was like, hey, I'll come back and talk later. I have a competition. And I was there competing with a friend of mine. He did an amazing Jawa.
Yeah, I remember that.
But I was like, cool, yeah, I just dropped these off. And that's always kind of been my thing is like anytime Josh has asked me like, hey, can you do this for victims? Hey, can you help out here? I was always very eager to be a part of it and to help. And like in a way, maybe that's one of my love languages is just helping, giving time. Time is the most valuable resource anyone can give to anyone. Um, Time is more valuable than money. Time is more valuable than so many things in life. And, you know, you really gave me an opportunity. And even before we started getting like very serious into things, you trusted me enough to come along to my first con with victims. It was you and Billy up at Fright Reads. I was just taking photos. I was just trying to get photos of everyone and help them get more organized with their stuff. And now, you know, I get to go to shows. I get to work the table. I get to go to all these communities where there is no mental health education and there's very limited resources. And you really, really, really see firsthand. We had a show, a smaller show. It was a con. And an individual came up to me and told me we had a mental health panel. And they came up to me and they said, I wasn't going to come today. I had no motivation to come today. I'm really glad you're talking about this. It's very important. And thank you. Because just telling me it wasn't, it's okay to not be okay. And just telling me, you know, it is okay to feel these things, but you are here, you are loved, you are not repeatable. Just saying those things helped one individual. And for me, that's all I cared about. I didn't care whether we sold any t-shirts. I didn't care whether we did nothing but film TikToks all day. all I cared about was making a difference. And Josh really gave me the platform to make a difference and give back, because there's a part of me that knows that if I had have never opened up and had the conversation and been so vulnerable on that live stream, I probably wouldn't be in therapy now. I probably, in like, to get in complete real honesty, I probably wouldn't be here right now. Like, here at all. Not just on this couch. It's really hard to openly admit when you're struggling. And I may not have seemed like I was struggling when I was doing the live stream, but I was struggling. We all were. And I think there's power in that. And, you know, giving others opportunities to tell their stories is very important. And I'm glad that you chose me, as weird and as crazy about Jaws as I am. I'm glad. And you know, I think it's important, because at the end of the day, no matter our relationship and what it looks like, there's people who need us more out there. And the fact that we can come together so strong as a couple and provide a sense of community as well for those, even if it's for your side, the metal shows, and for my side, the conventions. Hey, I'm doing pretty good. You did break me with Locator. Locator's now, hands down, we'll say this on stream to everyone. Locator, you guys are out of Richmond. Y'all are the hardest band. Y'all are the hardest band. And every band since then, I've kind of been like, oh, yeah, they're all right. They're no Locator though.
Locator apparently is the epitome of heavy.
They are how I do my scaling. You have like arteries, which is in like the middle. Ren Riot was a little more on my side of things, like the poppy metal, and then Locator. There's some hard dudes. They rock great.
Uh, I think my favorite con story of ours is, I don't know if you remember this. It was one of the bigger cons in the Richmond Convention Center. We had come to the end of the first day, and I was loading stuff. I was walking out the car to grab like water or something, and I'd caught you, and I don't remember, but I remember you were on mom duty, and we were talking, and we were like, kind of like talking about like how the con was going, and but I just remember like seeing you was like the highlight of that con, and I can't tell you why. But it's like what should have taken me like a 5 minute trip ended up taking me like 40 minutes, I think. We just like sat in the hall and just talked. And like that was kind of like always our dynamic is like um even now like we were up till like 2 or 3 like last night, this morning, just being like, don't want to go to bed. Let's just talk. Let's just run through the things that are currently in our brain. And I think that's something I always like very much value about our relationship. Like even like I think like transitioning from like friends into partners, it was like we both had I talked about the crush. She had a crush.
Not in the same way.
Not in the same way, but it started, and I was kind of at this point where I was like, I'm just gonna shoot my shot, see what happens. And even when we kind of first started testing the waters, see that I can make Jaws references too in a Jaws podcast.
Great. It was great.
When we first started kind of testing the waters, it was like we don't want to put any labels on this. We don't know what this is going to be. And the further we got into it, the more it just kind of felt like you said, like it was natural. And I think it's something that, when we talk about communities, one of the things that I've been emphasizing a lot at our events is the amount of communities that are like under resourced. Like, we just recently had done a show in Maryland at Clear Skies Meadery, and Maryland, out of all of the states we did this year, has one of the lowest suicide rates with 608 people who died by suicide, which is still a big number. But they also had 78% of their communities are underrepresented, which is, I believe, if I remember correctly, 22% higher than Virginia. In North Carolina, when we did Raleigh a few weeks ago, is 88% of communities are under-resourced. And so like there's such a big emphasis on community, and that's one of the things that like I've really learned this year is like the emphasis on like community, and that community like looks so differently to where like I have great community with like you and the family. I have great community with like the abyss gazing guys, and some of the other gents that are on my board. And then I have great communities with the guys like, again, like arteries, like estuaries, like those guys. This year there are no words to kind of put into the impact that they've had. And this year, when I talk about this year being the worst year of my life, I was 16 the first time I tried. I thought about suicide, and the first time that I contemplated it, and I'm 34 as we're recording this. And this year in August as well as February, I didn't want to be here anymore. Like I had so many days where like my breathing felt like an inconvenience, or like it felt like a burden to still exist here. And well, the first time it happened, I recognized like that I needed to have community, and I realized that like I had also, because I was on autopilot for like the last couple of years, that was a lot of those like really hard conversations that we had at the beginning of the year, whether it was the abyss gazing guys or some of the people that I worked with, but I was very intent about that. And you know, a lot of the stuff when it transitioned into the question of am I going to be married anymore to no, I'm not. Um, a lot of the guys in arteries like estuaries checked on me constantly, and I think it's one of those things that like it community comes from like really unexpected places, and I think that's probably one of the most beautiful things about Jaws is the scene that like really struck me rewatching it for this podcast was the scene where they're all on the boat, and it's kind of right before the shark kind of hammers them down, but they're all kind of sitting around drinking, and yeah, there's comparing scars and whatever semantics, but it's one of those things that it's like, man, like there are so many people that like I look around in my life and I'm just like, I don't know how I'm friends with these people, you know, and like even us, like I look around and we, you know, how did this happen exactly? Like that's the question that, you know, we constantly keep asking, but it's almost like destiny. That's so cheesy as a to transition.
To transition, destiny, transitioning into talking about the podcast. No, I mean, I was gonna go back and just you talked about community and you talked about things. I think about. Let me get a little emotional and personal here.
Oh no.
But I think about I think about our that first chance and that first sleepover, I guess we can say, in Winchester,
Okay.
where we stayed up till like 3 or 4 talking. Just talking.
Shared many con stories.
Just but it was just talking. That was the thing. It was like, oh my gosh, I didn't know how much I needed it until we just started unraveling and unwrapping and really trying to figure things out. And then we went to bed. And that next morning, we both woke up and felt completely different. And I mean, for me, it was like, I shouldn't be feeling the feelings I'm feeling. I also remember one of the last things saying to you before going to bed was like, I was like, you're gonna fall in love with me. You're gonna, and I told him, I was like, you're gonna fall in love with me. And you know, I think you did. I think you did.
Do you? Excuse me.
No, but it was something like that, like something as simple as two friends coming together, and we had no idea what it was gonna look like, and we just talked and talked and talked and talked and talked for hours.
Yeah.
And it kind of felt like, even though obviously like time had passed by, it felt like it hadn't. It feels like, you know, when you're seeing your college best friend for the first time in a really long time, it felt like that, but it was more and it was deeper. And I think maybe because when I met you, I never sugarcoated. I was always vulnerable about everything and my experience. I'm still a little bit vulnerable. Probably tell you too much that you don't need to know, but I think it was that vulnerability that made me realize like a true community, no matter what it looks like, accepts you faults, accept your faults. They respect your struggles. They are there for you more than just hey, are you okay? Or hey, I've noticed you seem kind of sad. Or like, hey, you're not your normal self. Like, yes, those are great check-ins, but true communities are like, hey, let's go out and do something. And I remember you were in your darkest time. It was about February. And I said, hey, let's go get coffee. You said no multiple times. You said, maybe we can make it work. And then it was, no, I'm too busy. No, I got this going on. But I tried. I did try. It was not for lack of trying. And then we both found community and solace in each other, which is something I think neither of us had expected. And much like the town of Amity, they all come together to help rid the shark. I'm thinking of like one scene in specifically when they and while let me be clear when I say this about Jaws. It is a great film for so many reasons, but in complete honesty, for shark advocacy. The scene I'm about to talk about is very graphic, very, very violent, in my opinion. But it's when the entire town goes out in their boats and they string up a tiger shark. But it's the whole community coming together to say, like, shit, this shark just killed this girl, maybe not a boating accident. Now girl's killed. Alex Kittner has been eaten. Well, we can only assume, right? Pippin has also been eaten at this point, the little pup. And the entire community was like, well, F this. Like, we're going to come together. We're going to catch a shark. And they catch a tiger shark. And they're like, I mean, this is great. Y'all came together, but it's the wrong shark, wrong mouth radius. But it's like, maybe, yes, they're all coming together to save the 4th of July because it's a town that makes most of its living off of its holiday weekends. And you have the mayor who's like, yeah, we got it. And Hooper comes in and he's like, Richard Dreyfuss is like, nah, man, this is the wrong shark. We gotta perform an autopsy. And then again, they're isolated because he's like, I won't have you cut open. The mayor's like, I won't have you cut open this giant fish and watch the little Kittner boy spill out. So they're isolated again. And it's like these little blips of community. And when you think about it, Hooper and Brody, they find community in each other. And they don't necessarily know that they have community with each other. And who makes it out of that movie? And Hooper.
Look, I
Someone. Hey, can I call you out right now?
Oh.
Someone did not finish the last 10 minutes of the movie, even if he's seen it multiple times. I asked, are we allowed to do spoilers? I feel like Jaws has been out long enough that I can have spoilers. Okay, spoiler. This is your spoiler warning. Tap out now. Skip for the next 3 minutes, maybe less time. I go, hey baby, how did the shark die exactly? And what did you say?
Brody shoots the tank. And he goes,
That is not what he said. No, that is not what he said. And if you didn't catch the little pew pews over here happening, he goes, Brody shoots it. And I was like, a bullet doesn't take out the shark. And he's not shot. The shark is not shot. The oxygen tank in the shark's mouth is shot, which then the bullet pierces the oxygen tank. Oxygen already is a very unstable chemical. There's a whole part in the movie where Hoop is like, you gotta secure those things down or they're gonna blow us all up. And so at one point, you know, they're hitting the shark with the tank and it gets lodged in its mouth and they've got the spear gun and they're like right. It's very thriller, very gory, very horrible. Sharks are amazing, wonderful creatures. I don't care what people say. The second you enter that ocean, you are in their domain. Okay? So like the second you get in the water, you are now in their territory. And they have every right to defend that territory. And who cares if we look like tasty snacks? We are entering their realm. We are the nom noms. But he's like, yeah, Brody shot it. And I was like, no, he didn't. Brody shot the oxygen tank and it blew up the shark. That's why there's no shark. That's what you said on podcast. That is not what you said in prep before the podcast. See how ready he is, guys. Look, he's so embarrassed. Just it's this really, unique feeling of just being able to share a world and a community with someone who was the absolute most unlikely person that I would ever think I would share a community with or a relationship with. I'm very grateful for that.
Yeah, boy, you talked about gore and guts. Wait till I put you through my favorite movie,
Halloween.
Halloween 2. It's
We're not here to talk about it.
as bloody as F. Anyway, one of the things that I feel like is kind of this like unspoken thing with adults is that community is like, when you're kids, community is so easy.
Yeah.
Like you just don't give a crap. And I shared this thing the other day on Facebook, and it's really, in hindsight, it's like something that's like really supposed to be like a funny joke, but it's basically said like, boys stop making friends at 15 and they're just set for life. And I think about the two oldest friends I have, which is my friend Ronnie and my friend Brandon, who is the latter is a co-host on Abyss Gazing. And I think about those guys. Those guys have been like my ride or die since like I was like 17. And I think about them and just like how much shit all three of us have been through. And and when you're a kid, it's so easy to make friends. When you're an adult, it's so challenging. And so I'm so grateful for the things that the people I've encountered, especially in the midst of doing victims. I think about, again, I bring up the dudes in arteries like estuaries, like I do, like, and I booked them last year in Chesapeake, and their vocalist Jordan had gotten COVID. And at this time, this was like the first time I'd ever met them. By this point, they had like no demos out, so I didn't even know what they sounded like. Didn't know. I booked them off of my friend Rob's suggestion. And I was like, okay, cool. And I did my normal like, welcome to victims and villains, this is who we are type of thing. And I ended up doing the entire set with them just as a guest vocalist, and just made up a bunch of words and things like that I would normally do. And Brian, their drummer, kept in touch with me, and so we would talk, and he checked in with me, and then everything was like at its worst. They played a show here in Richmond. I went, and then like during July, when they had played a show we did in Banditos here in Richmond, it's one of those things that I had talked to their vocalist Jordan for the first time, and we just started kind of exchanging stories about why mental health is so important. And a month later, I was on the road with them on a tour that got like thrown together super last minute. I got super lucky on a lot of those days. Pure luck. The Bear the Anxiety tour was a great time, but it was also one of the worst times of my life because it was where literally everything fell apart. And everything fell apart for me, and every one of those guys was like, dude, we are here. And I've just never like been in the midst of that to be like go through that with bands or like anybody else really, aside from the Abyss Gazing guys. And a few days later, a few days before that tour, I was one of my, uh, I don't want to be here anymore type of feelings. And dude, I just remember like being in the midst of that with them, and just really loving those guys throughout it, and getting to know them all on like really emotionally like deep levels have been things that have made this year worth living. And it's an unexpected community. And I think about, one of the scenes that I think about too in this movie when we talk about community is the very first interaction between Hooper and Brody when Hooper gets into AMD, and he's trying to like figure out like where to go. And it's just like it's this very straightforward interaction. And again, I have those types of interactions all the time, and you never know really how something is going to play out, um, until it gets in. Like, I never would have imagined, meeting you 4 years ago, us talking about like cosplay and mental health, and being here doing this now, or having done a lot of the adventures and having a lot of the conversations that we've had, or um, life in the last like 3 or 4 months that we've had. Community is just a funny thing that way.
I think it's important, to have that kind of community. I do want to flip it a little bit. I want to flip the script a little bit, and let's talk about being surrounded by community, but not feeling like part of the community. Do you know which character I think best fits that? You may not agree with me, but who do you think fits that?
Quint. To a T. Quint 1,000%. Because even when you like go into the scene where like they're like having that town hall meeting, and they're like, yeah, you got that, and he's just like, I'll do it, and like he like lays out his proposal, and but he's like isolated from everyone else. Like even when you kind of see as they're preparing for the voyage later on in the movie, like he's very much like away from everyone else, like doesn't want anything to do. And um I think honestly, like having community, like being in the midst of community but not having any ties to community, one of the most like horrible feelings. um you know I go back to like, I know that I have people that love me. I know that I've had people that have loved me. And when those suicidal ideations creeped in earlier this year, it felt like that exact feeling where it was like, I know people love me, people care about me, but do they really? And Quint is an interesting character to consider in that regards, because like he chose that life essentially for himself. At least that's the read that I have.
I mean, yes and no. You have to remember, this is a group of individuals who make their living off of the tourists that come for the season, and there's only 2 seasons. There's summer and there's spring break. And he by trade is a fisherman. He is by trade a fisherman. He does have the community. You have to put it in perspective. They are on an island, which means they are surrounded by water. I don't know if I can take you seriously with full Bruce going on. And Quint is a tradesman. He's a fisherman. He's part of the community. He, he maybe seems a little more on the outskirts, but he has that community. He's a native to the island. He's local, and I think he desperately wanted that community, but kind of put himself on the out, and he gets ostracized a lot in the movie. But we talk about Hooper and Brody having each other throughout the entire movie, and I'll go back to that one scene you're talking about, scars. It's one of my favorite scenes in the movie because it is the first time you see that hard exterior shell of Quint come off. And they're talking about the Indianapolis, and he's talking about how many men went in the water. And if you don't know that story, the USS Indianapolis was hit by a Japanese submarine, basically. Well, not submarine, but it was a weapon meant to cause many a casualty. And several hundreds of men went in the water, and only a few came out. A lot of them, and he talks about this. He talks about how a lot of men started to die from dehydration. A lot of them weren't strong swimmers. And then how the rest were picked off by sharks. And so he really has a vendetta against sharks from the very get-go because of his past trauma, his prior trauma. And that community wasn't even aware that he was a vet, that he had served his nation and had scars from creatures that you should never have to worry about when you're at war, or worry about being a problem when you're doing things. And it's a really cool thing, I think, to see someone's shell come off and someone's walls come down. And to share a little bit about you, and I think all of us put up walls to protect our hearts and to protect our feelings. And when we put up walls, those are big walls that need a bigger boat. And those walls are holding up, they're like the floodgates. And of course you're going to need a bigger boat to navigate those challenges. And he really sucks, but like Quint chose to live where he did. He chose he chose to stay there, so he's effectively choosing his community, but the shark got him in the end. And I think about that scene with Alex Kittner's mother on the dock when they caught the tiger shark, and she's like, I just learned a girl died here earlier this week. and she is in black. She's in mourning. She is the entire communities come to support this mother. And Quint dies quite violently. He is bitten in half. He is thrashed around. He has blood spewing out of his mouth. He dies very, very violently. And of course, the movie ends with Brody and Hooper paddling and making jokes about the tide. And they're paddling back into shore because at this point, the orca is just like at the bottom of the ocean and Quint is gone. And Brody at that point had thought he was gone as well, but Hooper, obviously being the phenomenal scuba diver that he is, he has watched all of the series play out. You don't see this, but it's inferred. And then, you get Jaws 2, and we won't get into Jaws 2, but there's no end scene, there's no nothing, there's nothing that, like, we have today, and, what sucks is Quentin died trying to help a community face a problem. He gave his life for that community. And I think a lot of people overlook that. And while he may not have set out with the intention of being eaten by a shark, that's what happened. And we don't see whether he's remembered. We don't see how the community responds. And you don't get it in Jaws 2 either. And so, it's that you can be a part of a community, but you can be so ostracized and so overlooked for what you are. And I think about that, and I think about, in relations to my life and the cosplay community, and how there's a lot of groups out there. Some are good, some are toxic. You don't really know till you're in it. And you can feel surrounded by people. You can feel that they want you to be there. But the second you take a break for your mental health or your well-being, or you can't participate, or you had something planned, like I think about group cosplays the most, you have something planned and your mental health suffers. It suffers. And you're afraid that community is going to leave you. And sometimes they do. They leave you for the sharks.
I think even like looking at it at a much more, I'd probably say recent, but on a larger scale, I think about people like Chester Bennington, Robin Williams, Chris Cornell, that have most famously, unfortunately, died by suicide. And Robin Williams especially, I think, hits the hardest because like Robin Williams was like, I think, a core part of like both of our childhoods. When you think about like movies like Mrs. Doubtfire, Aladdin, Good Will Hunting, Patch Adams, Dead Poets Society, Toys, that list, just Mork and Mindy, that list literally goes on and on and on. And Jumanji, he had such a profound impact on our generation and was literally one of the most beloved people and literally surrounded by everything anybody could want: a good family, a loving wife or partner, an amazing career, riches. I mean, he did so much and was able to like also give back, and yet like looked around at his circumstances and was like, it's not enough. And it's one of those heaviest things that I go back to again, some of my own ideations from earlier this year, to where it's like, I don't know, like I shouldn't be feeling this way. And had I not I remember there was one time where when it first hit me, I was immediately calling people. I was like, I cannot be left alone. If I am left alone, I will not be here tomorrow. I'm just going to put it to you point blank. And it's really hard for someone that is a suicide loss survivor myself, or somebody that has had tons of really close friends to him that has lost people to suicide. It's a and someone that has dedicated literally half their life to mental health awareness, education, suicide prevention. It's really hard for me to admit that everything that I went through, it wasn't enough. That I didn't want to be here anymore. And I remember calling Billy, and Billy stayed on the phone with me for 45 minutes, was there literally the next day to stay with me that weekend. I ended up finding a place to stay that Thursday night, and eventually I also stayed with some friends on that Monday. And wasn't until probably the first week of everything happening that I just was not didn't want to be I was okay. And I think that's such a hard spot to be in, because depression has this way of like not necessarily tricking your brain, but making you kind of see this like this way of like, oh, you brings out your demons, you're not good enough. Isolate yourself. These people will never understand. And I've had the exact opposite experience where like I think there's a lot of people that don't necessarily know that I had suicidal ideations earlier this year. Um, I think a lot of people understand why I would have those. Um, but also I think about the energy that I've really pressed into community and the energy that I really pressed in to have that. Um, and you don't know what people are going through until it's too late sometimes. And that's why understanding warning signs of depression are so important, or understanding warning signs of suicidal ideation is so important. In the case of like Quint, I think you bring up a good point about it being like no one kind of really knew or understood like how much he did. And
demons he was still dealing with.
yeah. And that's kind of one of those things. I think it's really interesting to look at Jaws throughout like a mental health perspective, especially from like a male perspective, um, especially older male, because Quint is probably like what, 40s or 50s? Okay. Age is really hard to decipher in this, because Alex Kittner's mom apparently is like 30, and she looking like she just walked out of Grandpa Simpson's retirement castle. Um, they did that woman dirty. I'm sorry. But yeah, but like even then, like you don't talk about your mental health. If you talk about mental health, especially for a guy, you're weak, and that is why I am so consistent with wanting to talk about my mental health, or like I check in with friends, being like, "Hey, how are you doing today? Is everything all right? You know, you seem off." Those conversations are like really crucial. So we don't have some of the scenes and some of the arcs that we see here with Quint. I mean, even Brody, like I think about like his like fear of water throughout the course of this movie. Like it's slightly kind of like almost like there's like shame within him to kind of talk about it. And I think that like again, anything that makes you look less like manly or like less heroic, like that's something that like people really don't want you to look at. And those conversations are important to have. You know, even if you tell one person, like create a safety zone for yourself, like, hey, this is my fear, or like, hey, this is my struggle, or this is why I'm depressed, or stuff like that.
You know, you brought up a really good point just in like Jaws and mental health and looking at it from a different perspective. And there is one specific character we haven't really talked about, and not Alex Kittner's mom, but another mom nonetheless, Chief Brody's wife. But I will say, watching Jaws, like, as a parent going through mental health stuff and having a child with mental health difficulties, um, dude, it hits so different. Just watching it, and it's like all the overlooked stuff, right? Like, Brody's afraid of water. He doesn't want his kids out on the open water. Mrs. Brody is turning to a research book that Brody's got, and the boys are in their little freaking sailboat off their dock. But again, it's an island, so they're surrounded by water. And she flips and she sees, and it's very foreshadowy, she sees a shark that is bitten into the hull of a boat. And she's like, boys, you get out of there right now. And listen to your father, and they're not locals. She's from like New York, New York. Like, she has a very
We could park the car.
stop. No, we're not doing that. Um, but I think about that and how she's really fearful then. I think about all the committees she's trying to be on. I mean, her husband just got a job there as the chief of police. That's it. She's trying to integrate herself into this community of locals. And so she's in the community, but she really isn't. There is I consider it a iconic scene. It's the first time you see more than just the shark fin. You see the shark under the water, but they're all on the beach, and beaches aren't closed. I think Hitler's been eaten at this point. Pippin's been eaten at this point. There's a girl painting next to the pond. Everyone's on the beach. They're searching the shark towers. They're making headway. They're trying to figure it out. And oh no, so it's like the day after, but it's her these two kids with a fake fin. And they got all their guns on them in all the boats, and they're like, it's a false alarm, Brody, false alarm. And you just hear, shh, 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 shh. And it's the girl that had been painting. There's a shark in the estuary. There's a shark in the estuary. Which, if you didn't know this, there are always going to be sharks in an estuary. Estuaries are made up of what is called brackish water, which is where salt water meets fresh water, and the salinity is a little lower. And that is mostly where you will find baby shark pups, whether it be bull shark, whether it be scallop head, hammerhead. Yeah, I know. I had to throw a little bit of science, a little bit of fact in there, because just to me, it's how I go. But essentially, they call it a pond. Like, they call it the pond next to the ocean, and girls continually screaming, shark, shark, shark. And there's a creepo guy who's like, hey, what are you guys doing over there? What are you boys doing over there? And they're just on their sailboat, like, hanging out. And Brody comes down, and Mrs. Brody's like, Michael's in the boat. Michael's over there. And they come running. And Michael, everyone's out except for the creepy guy who gets eaten, which, whatever. But Michael is left in a state of shock. And they are taking him to the hospital. And they're in the hospital room. And he's like, oh, I want. And the mom's like, oh, what do you want, honey? You can have anything you want. And he's like, ice cream. And then he's like, oh, and coffee. Coffee, because that seems like the most logical explanation for this little 10-year-old after just having witnessed someone being eaten by a shark. Like, He literally, that shark goes right by him. And I think about that hospital. And I think about all the people coming in and out. And I think about fucking Larry, that mayor. And he's like, Mrs. Brody, I'm so sorry this has happened. I'm so sorry. If there's anything we can do, like, and Brody just goes, Larry, we got to shut down the beaches. And he's like, but tomorrow is the 4th of July. So you have Brody, who is the chief of police, dealing with all the shit show and the fallout that's happening because he's like, nah, dudes, this isn't some boating accident. This isn't something fucking random. It's a shark. It is a mean, lean, muscular machine that has got a taste for human blood on its mind. Which, as we all know, not true. There was one instance in the 1900s where this happened, and that's actually where Peter Benchley uh, drew most of his inspiration for the book Jaws from, was an actual real life incident that happened in the New England community. And I'm sure we can post links to some research about that and just the story behind all that. But there's no one in the room. All the women she was just talking to on the beach, listening to music with, not a single one of those women, people, friends, supposedly this community that she is supposed to have because her husband is the chief of police. But they weren't born there. She's not a local. So as much as she wants community, they're not going to be there for her. Larry, the mayor, is the only one, like I said, that shows up to the hospital to check on Michael. And it's not to check on Michael. It's, Brody, I'm really sorry this happened. Like, but tomorrow's the 4th of July. Like, we're keeping the beaches open. Like, I don't really give a shit whether your kid was just traumatized and saw someone being eaten. And she's a mom of 2 young kids where tragedy is rocking a little community. And they choose to stay and to live there. And she has seen this horrible terror that has happened with her son. And then she just lets her husband go on out in that boat with Quentin Hooper. And she's very worried. She's very stressed out. She's very upset. She has no one. Like, when you think about it, if, let's say, Brody got eaten on that boat instead of Quint, she's now a widow. She now has 2 small children to take care of, and they're going to have to move back, most likely. They won't stay on that island. And she was president of all these committees, like all of those committees, and they talk about that. Like, in the in between, she's part of the July 4th decorating committee. In the second movie, you do see a little more of the community, but it really does play off the idea of isolation and then, like, having a community but not feeling like part of the community, and like feeling like they'll be there for you, but only if you play by their rules. And there's a lot of friendships that go sour that way, and there's a lot of communities that value clout, that value what's trending versus, let me look at my members. Let me look at my community members. Let me look at the town hall members in Jaws, and let's really sit down and come together as a community and see what we can do, see what we can provide for this person. And they try, obviously, and everyone has their own different opinions and stuff like that. But in the real world, everyone's going to have their own opinions. Everyone's going to have different views. But in a way, it's like, I hate putting it this way, but it's like hitting unsubscribe. Like you're hitting you feel like you have that community around you, but it feels like unless you participate in all of those community activities, unless you put yourself, you know, into every single niche, every single thing. And this, again, I'm just comparing this to like my own experiences, but I have found that it's like, oh, you don't want to do this? We're going to unsubscribe to you because you're having a bad day. Suck it up, buttercup. And like that is not okay. Like I think just I think about something as simple, and you are probably the biggest advocate for this, but shoes shoes at cons, and being comfortable and valuing your mental health, because pain is related to mental health, whether you choose to believe it or not. Mental health can cause pain, whereas pain can also affect your mental health. And as a cosplayer, you know, you want the right outfit, you want the right shoes, you kind of just suffer through at that point. And well, yes, no, we don't do that anymore. We are making healthy habits for ourselves, but you suffer through, and then it's like you do something for your mental health, right? And then it's like, dude, you were supposed to do this, this, and this. Like, why aren't you doing it? And it's like, I'm really sorry. I'm having a mental health day. I'm not doing so good. Okay, I guess that's fine. You're just not going to be involved in anything for the day. Let me just let you think about that for a second. Because someone chose their mental health over whatever was planned with the group, reached out, talked about this. It's like, cool, we're going to unsubscribe to you for the day. And I think about that when hard things come up, and you know, you shared about February being very hard for you. The end of May, there was an individual that I had met who wanted more than a friendship, and I did not. And they were part of a bigger group that I was part of. And I had told some individuals in the group how uncomfortable they made me, how bad it was, how 48 voice memos that were sent to me went from, you know, oh, you have such a big heart, why can't you love me, to your horrible mother, I hope you die. "48 voice memos. And I wanted to kill myself, and I tried. Um, and a friend had called me. I noticed my speech was slurred. I could hardly stay awake on the phone. When within a 10-minute conversation, I was in and out. My breathing was shallow. I was preparing for it. And they had the sense to recognize I wasn't okay, and said, you need to get help. You need to let the person that is in the house with you, you need to let a grown adult know what's going on, because something's up and you are not you. And it's true. I wasn't me. And they told me, you got a big con coming up. You're going to be around that person. You need to let the other people know what's going on. And so I told them that I had actually more than an ideation, that I had tried to commit suicide. And they said, no worries. Like, you'll be with us the whole time. It's okay. In Jaws, I know it's weird to talk about something so heavy and then to talk about Jaws, but I've always loved Jaws. I've always found it to be something that drew me closer to the ocean, that made me feel better. They showed up at a photo shoot. The stalker that that made me want to kill myself, and the people that I told were aware and ignored it. And there is a pretty interesting video in character that is still up on my TikTok page, where I love the ocean. I'm swimming out active in an ocean where there are active great white sharks. Maybe not all the time, but about this time, there could have been at least one or two roaming. You have shark tracking now. I didn't care. I was hoping I would get eaten by a shark. I kept swimming further out and out to try and get caught in a cross current that would drag me out further, because I knew if I could just get out further, a shark could take me out. It's not suicide necessarily. It's a happy accident that I get taken out by a shark. You see in the video, you see me fighting and struggling against the waves while still being in character. And I didn't want to get back on that beach, because the community that I had trusted and let into my life didn't care. They cared more about having enough bodies for a photo shoot. This is the part of the big feelings when we say you need a bigger boat. This is where the podcast comes from. I didn't want to go back on that beach. I didn't want to get out of the water, because somehow being alone and isolated in that water was better than going back to a community who only values clout and what's trending and how many bodies can they get to be in a TikTok. And it's not okay. It's not okay. I had let them know how I was feeling about everything. We had the rest of the con to go through. Eventually, one of my other friends in the group was like, Smash, you gotta come in, like, you're gonna die. You're like, you gotta come in. You're gonna hurt yourself, and you could be the strongest swimmer. I don't care. I come back in. And I listened to her. And she had no idea about the suicide attempt. No one had told her. I hadn't told her. The individual that I confided in hadn't told her. And she was worried about my well-being. Just swimming. That same individual watched me confront my stalker the next day. The stalker asked, why did you delete me on social media? Why did you unfollow me? Why won't you return my messages? And I said, because you sent me 48 voice memos that made me try and kill myself. And that's not okay. And they caught the tail end of that conversation. And so I told her after a dinner, because the person that I had told chose to be a good person when somebody could have easily been given an Uber, and decided, I don't care if this person that I supposedly am supposed to care about and be in this group, I don't care what she's been through. I'm going to be a good person and give them a ride to dinner. And I had to be in the same person. I had to be in the car with the same person that made me want to take my life. And in that moment, I felt so undervalued. And later that night, I told the friend who had witnessed part of my conversation with him, like, hey, I almost didn't come because I almost died. I'm very fortunate that I didn't. I'm glad I'm here now. But it made me really think about community and what that looks like. And sometimes the community you create or join into is not actually the community that cares. Because I think about victims and villains, and I think about the fact that we were not that close until this year. We really, I mean, we were acquaintances. We showed up at cons and we always talked to each other, and but we weren't best friends. We weren't close. You had no idea what was going on in my life. I only knew what was going on in your life based off of what you shared. And I remember telling you that and it being like one of the hardest things ever. And then you pretty much being kind of brought into that community, in that group, and seeing firsthand how they preach about caring about mental health and everyone's mental health and well-being, but their words don't match their actions at all. So you can have a community and you can choose that community. But if that community isolates you when you need them the most, they are not your community. And so I did rewatch this again before this podcast, and having all of that in mind now and looking at Chief Brody's wife and looking at Quint, they had the community. The community unsubscribed to them because they were different or they were difficult or they were struggling. That's what I mean when I say unsubscribe. It's like you can have your community, but at the end of the day, they have to actually, they're not a community unless they support you unconditionally. And you say this to me all the time. You say, my love is not conditional. You say that to me all the time. My love is not conditional on what you can do for me, on how you are, whether you're happy, whether you're sick, whether you're sad. I love you unconditionally. That is what you say to me pretty much every day, I feel like, at this point. And I know I'm embarrassing you, and I don't care because it's our couples podcast. So I'm allowed to embarrass you. But without Josh and without other communities and without those few individuals, you say, you love me unconditionally. And I think that's important, is you don't necessarily need a community that loves you, but you do need a community that's going to be there for you unconditionally, no matter what's going on. Is that they just show up, step in, step up. That's very valuable to have. So, make sure you have that community. Make sure you have someone, even if it's just one person. A community can be one person. That's what they don't tell you. And make sure you have that one person that will support you, that will be there for you unconditionally.
That's one of those things that I have learned a lot this year. Reflecting wise is community. I think part of the, talk about how shitty this year has been, but part of like the other side of that has been that like, wow, like I've learned a lot, and I've like really reflected a lot on the relationships that like I hold like really near and dear. So part of this year, like the first quarter of it, was me like going back and saying, hey, like I know you keep checking in on me. I am checking in on myself, and there are things that I would like to apologize for. It was honestly were like literally some of the hardest conversations that I had. I think the only person that like community wise that like within my circle that I didn't neglect in the last few years was Brandon. It's because we talk literally basically every day. And we talk about dumb shit. We vent toward to one another, but like we always like there's like a sense of like real community there. And that's always been kind of that threshold that like for me, like I've always been to if I can talk about things with you guys. Because in my opinion, like I think community is kind of this trajectory, right? Where you have people that you meet, like you called us like acquaintances until this year. There are people that you have acquaintances there, and then there's a moment within that acquaintanceship that flips. And just you have the introduction of like serious shit, and now you're not just a friend, you're an actual like part of that community and part of that story. Um and so like this year has been like I think you bring up so many good points. I think some of it from like a perspective like you talked about like the cosplay groups being good but also at the same time not really knowing how toxic they can be until you're in the midst of them. I think a lot of that also applies for just friends in general. Um, I mean, friendships in general, because a part of friends is, to quote Just Friends, is a part where Ryan Reynolds says, you have to put yourself out there and just hope people like you back. Like that's what friendship is. And we talked earlier about how complicated it can get when it is how complicated it gets when it is adults, because like it's really hard to make friends as adults. And I mean it's harder to make friends, the right friends, when you get things like jobs, careers, families, kids. All of that kind of really complicates that as well. um but what I was going to say is like I talked about it a lot at our shows this past fall, and how grateful I am for those communities and how grateful I am for you. You know, um, you're so humble too.
Oh, no. He embarrasses me a lot.
I do. We have contests to see who can embarrass the other person most. It's great. Um, I genuinely like. You do need days where like you show up for that person, and um, there's so many days and times where like I literally just want to show up and just ask, are you okay? Is there something you need? Sometimes I feel like I ask that stuff way too much. And but I think it's also the signs of what many would argue is a healthy relationship, healthy community. I think you should be checking in on your friends, even if it feels like it's a little bit too much. Because the thing about depression, the thing about mental health is that a lot of those are this like almost mask for hyper independence. And in that hyper independence, it convinces you that you don't need anyone else, that you can be completely fine on your own. And man wasn't lived to simply exist alone. That's just not something that I think was ever a part of the grand universe's plan when beings were evolved into where we are now. I think there's always been a need for it. I think there's always been that importance for it. Um, yeah.
When you talked about Brandon being your person and Lauren, Lauren is my person.
Shout out to the homies.
Shout out to you guys. Lauren is my person. I had friends growing up, but I moved around and my friends moved and then college happened and I still have one good friend from high school. I have a few very good friends from high school that we can just pick up and it's like no time has passed. But I actually met you before I met Lauren, and Lauren is my very, very, very best friend. She met me after having kids. She met me in the midst of trying to figure out who the heck I was outside of being a mother, because at that point, you know, none of the kids, like, yes, they need you, but they're not dependent on like a nursing schedule or anything like that. And we met at pinball. My friend, he owns an arcade up in Fredericksburg, and I just remember like her coming in, me being very like, oh no, I don't know if I feel about a new person coming into our pinball scene, and him taking me aside and being like, oh, can you show Lauren the ropes, you know? Can you kind of like show her what things are? And Lauren, hey, listen, I knew nothing about pinball back then. You made me the great pinball player I am today. And for someone who had never played pinball competitively, girl, you kick ass. You kick ass. If you are not top in the state right now, something's very wrong, because you kick ass. And Lauren and I always had just like the chill, relax, watch bad for you reality TV, hang out, cook dinners, just like a kid free zone for me. And she became my best friend somewhere in the process. And when I finally let her meet the kids, she introduced herself as Queen Lauren. And she will no longer be called anything other than Queen Lauren around the children. It's really cute. It's really funny. They keep it going. But we had to have some of those difficult talks. And it scared me because I was afraid I was going to lose my friend. And she stuck by me. I did more therapy. I could talk to her about stuff. I could talk to her about therapy. I could talk to her about relationships. She made me realize a lot of the things in my life were very toxic. A lot of the people in my life were very toxic, and never really told me like I should get rid of them or I should push them out. It was always, you don't need them. You don't need them. They cause you so much drama, so much strife. You don't need them. And then the second thing I was always worried about that she really told me, I was like, you know, I do really care what other people think about me. I do really care about my image. I do really care about the kind of person I'm presenting when I put myself out there. And I wasn't ready for everyone to have a look inside my life and just how complicated it was. And she just said, who cares? It's none of their business. What you do in your private time is your business, no one else's. They shouldn't comment on it. And when we had those really hard talks about suicide and feeling really sad and really depressed and stuff like that, it's like somehow sharing that made us both better. Like sharing my demons made us stronger, made us closer. And so there are days, where we need one another, but I can think of a day a few weeks back where I was like, I need Lauren. You knew this. You knew this. Don't act surprised. You knew this, and you were very supportive, and you said, I think you should go hang out with Lauren before pinball. Now, was I still having a really shitty day, and did you show up at pinball anyway? Yes, you did. Yes, you did. But I had all of that girl time with Lauren, and I got it this week too. I don't get it very often because co-parenting is hard. It's a lot harder than they tell you. There's a lot of emotions involved. There's a lot of things where you just want your kids to be the absolute best versions of themselves that they can be, and you want to give them the best version of yourself. And co-parenting is really hard to stay neutral, to be Switzerland sometimes. And when I get those times with her, they're always special. Lauren is one of those people. She shapes me the way I am. She also is the one that coined, I'm a beta fish, which you agreed. I am both feisty and beautiful. And I love that, because if you don't have a friend who can't tell you how it is, are they really your friend? Because she fully embraces my unhingedness, fully embraces the chaoticness. And yet, I'm just a beta fish.
You are beautiful. Let's just start there. You can be both. You're beautiful. Yeah, no, I think that's like that's something that I think everyone needs, is that ideal of like prioritizing those times with itself, and like
It's good for your mental health.
it is good. It is good.
Resets.
Yeah, it is good for your mental health to kind of like reset and like have that time. You know, I am stepped in dad, as it were. But almost every one of my like friends like has kids, and so like now having that interaction with the littles, and prioritizing also time with them, like, and wanting to invest time into them, like I understand it now. And parenting, I think, will be a podcast episode in and of itself.
Yeah, that's for another time.
But I value those, because now that I have that side of my life, and now that I also have friends that have kids as well, like it's like I think that time that you get is like that much more special. Like I hung out with Ronnie beginning of this month, and it was like first time I'd seen him in like almost like 2 months. And it means a lot, like to have just like sit down and like see him. Um, and it's one of those things that like you joke around, but like you also have these like really serious conversations as well. It's been such a blessing. And like I think that like having a partner and like needing a partner, I think that's a good thing. I think it's healthy. Something I feel like is also like taboo in relationships, or just weird. Be obsessed with your partner. It's completely healthy. root for them. Um, be their number one fan and their number one cheerleader, and show up on days where it is. But there are going to be days and times where I know that situations are going to arise that I can be the person that you need or the thing that you need. I know that that's going to be Lauren or a number of other people. Um, and that's okay, because at the end of the day, like, I'm not going anywhere. I will love you until the last breath out of my lungs. You're very red right now. I know you can't see it because of the light, but you're very red right now.
Oh, comment.
But I think it is, again, picking the right the right community is something that's super important for your mental health, because, bringing it back to Jaws, like, you're standing in the midst of this insanity of amity and seeing all of these fears around, and like wanting to be involved and invested, but not being that way because you're not a person of interest, or you're not a person that was born there. I think it's really, like, those arguments are bullshit. But um, value those that you actually have that can invest time into your mental health as well. Do we want to end there?
So, other than, you said invest time in your mental health, invest your time in others too. I capitalized on it earlier. I'm going to say it again. Time is the most valuable resource you can give anyone. Which is why we thank you for letting us take all of your time to listen to this podcast.
So this is normally the part where we would do socials. As of now, we do not have any socials, but you can find our parent company, Victims and Villains. We're on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. Where can people find you online?
Where can't they? TikTok, Instagram, and Facebook are all Smash B cosplay. The best way is probably Instagram. I answer most DMs on there the most. Also, it gives you a link to my link tree, so it connects you to all of the podcasts I've been in, with Victims and Villains, all of the, as well as additional podcasts that I've appeared on in the past. I don't have any cons coming up. Taking a little break should be good. Well, should be very, very nice. Much needed with everything going on in the cosplay community. We don't have a social for Bigger Boat yet. We have a sticker and a logo. But we have no socials for the actual podcast itself yet. What else am I on? Discord, Smash B Cosplay. I think that's it. I don't think we have any joint. We don't really. We're kind of new to this whole relationship thing. Everything feels so like weirdly natural. Like we're like not like we're not doing the typical social media stuff. I'm sure eventually we'll chronicle all of our adventures in a different something, but you can follow most of the adventures on TikTok or Instagram. Yeah, that's all I can think of.
Yeah, we chronicle our adventures. We just don't post them. We're really, really bad about that. We keep it for ourselves.
Someone posts them. You just can't see them. They're off camera over that way. Someone likes to print out photos and put them up. There's a very big canvas up here. You can't see it. Hold on, wait. Let's see if I can tilt it just the tiniest of bits. Let's see. Oh, Yep. There you go. That's the canvas. So we do chronicle our adventures, but yes, we're very bad at posting them. But also, it's kind of nice having something that's just us, that's not necessarily out there for the world. And that's kind of why we started this podcast, is we wanted a fresh start. We wanted to be able to talk to people, and we wanted to come in and we're coming into this in a very interesting aspect, in a very strange twist and turn of events. And now that you kind of know the story behind Jaws and the bigger boat, thank you for joining our bigger boat podcast, our inaugural episode.
We'll come up with a better tagline to end this show than thank you. But yes, thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. Yeah, I think right now, like, we don't really know. Again, it feels like you're at the beginning stages of the relationship where it's like, okay, we're gonna see where this goes. See, yeah, and that's the same thing with the podcast. Like, when we started biz gazing, we were like, I don't know where it's gonna go, and we're almost pushing 200 episodes now. And hopefully bigger boat will get there eventually, but until then, thank you guys for checking us out and letting it okay, here you go.
Well, you can finish.
For letting us into your day.
And just remember, for big emotions, big feelings, big events, you're going to need a bigger boat.